Okay, let us begin. All right, well, firstly, I want to start by thanking everybody so much for coming and for making my vision and my idea come to fruition. All right, so let's begin. In 1992, a group of independent mediators in Norway hosted a series of secret discussions on Israeli-Palestinian peace building, as I'm sure many of you are aware. Alongside unofficial representatives from Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, they laid the foundations for what became one of the most significant diplomatic breakthroughs in the conflict's history. I'm talking about the Oslo Accords. While these accords ultimately did collapse, they proved something to everybody. They showed what is possible when independent voices away from the cameras sit down to talk. And that's where this conference draws its inspiration from the quiet hope those Norwegian officials had, despite the seemingly impossible challenges ahead. Assalamu alaikum and Shalom lekulhem, and in English we say welcome everybody. My name is Inuka Tatton, and I'm the host and organizer of the first two conferences in this series, focused on developing, as the name suggests, a geopolitical framework for a sustainable future. A quick word on who I am before we begin. I'm an Australian student, currently completing both high school and university, and I've spent the last years doing everything I can to help address the horrors of this conflict. I volunteer internationally through organizations like Unity as Strength, where I help coordinate cross-border communication between Israelis and Palestinians. I'm also an academic writer, author of the book Diaspora to Statehood, which discovers the history of this devastating conflict. I've published over 300 articles through MENA Geopolitical, an independent news platform I run, and in the Times of Israel. Right now, I'm also writing my second book. But more important than any of that is this. I am, like all of you, a global citizen. And that gives me a responsibility, not to stay silent, but to act, to do what I can to help restore a sense of shared humanity in a world that increasingly denies it. So I want to thank each of you for being here, for speaking, for listening, and for helping me build this vision. A vision for peace and a vision I know many of you also hold. The past 2 years and the many decades before then have left deep scars across the Middle East and across the world. October 7th did not begin this conflict, but it marked a turning point in a brutal, ongoing struggle. We have all felt its impact, some directly, others from afar. But let's not ignore the facts. What we've seen in Gaza since that day has been catastrophic. Entire families have been buried under rubble. More than 50,000 people allegedly killed, many of them civilians, including thousands of children. Hospitals have been destroyed, water and electricity cut, journalists, aid workers, and medics killed in the line of duty. And for Israel, the conflict has also been brutal. Hamas launched thousands of missiles and carried out a ground invasion into Israeli territory. They killed thousands and took hundreds of people hostage, some still remaining in captivity nearly 2 years later. Whether you agree with my terminology or not, this has become one of the deadliest assaults on civilians in the 21st century. And we cannot speak of peace without acknowledging that. Reports will differ, narratives will clash, but I believe we can all agree on one thing. The killing of innocent civilians on both sides must never be accepted. We are all human, after all. Our perspectives will differ on this matter, of course they will, but I ask you all for one thing, to sincerely, to listen, to me and to each other, because each voice and each experience tells a piece of the story. And only by listening can we begin to understand the truth behind the conflict. I've long argued that peace cannot begin without understanding. You cannot build a bridge on nothing, you need a foundation. And that foundation is trust. And that trust cannot be built on division, controversy, or sectarianism. This conflict is rooted in the Levant or the Holy Land, but its impacts ripple greatly across the globe. Take my own experience, for example. I'm from Australia, almost as far removed from the Middle East as you can get. I have no relatives related to anybody in the Middle East. And yet, during last year's US electoral season, a violent protest broke out in my beloved home city, Melbourne. Thousands clashed with police, and violence unfolded. They demanded a boycott of our forces exposition over its alleged ties to the Israeli military. I remember watching firsthand the chaos unfold and realizing just how far this conflict's reach extends. It's not just a regional crisis, it is a global fault line. And that's why we're here today. Not to solve the conflict, because this conference won't do that, and not to claim we have all the answers, because we don't. But we're here to do something that matters just as much. We're here to start. We're here to talk, to listen, and to rebuild that trust long lost, piece by piece. People sometimes ask me, why this issue? Why now? And my answer is simple. Because the world is growing quieter to the suffering of others. Because when governments and institutions fail, the people must step up. Because we cannot afford to wait for another generation to inherit this conflict without also granting them a path forward. Just as soldiers from across the world once united to defeat the fascist regimes in World War II, we too have a responsibility to stand up for peace, for dignity, and for coexistence. Millions fought and died to protect the freedoms we all live under today, and I am too willing to dedicate my life to advancing this cause of peace. So that's why I extend my hand out to each of you to join me, because every conversation matters, every act of goodwill counts, and every person who shows up is an additional footstep in the right direction. Before we begin, allow me to introduce the esteemed voices who will be guiding today's discussions. Before this, I want to briefly note that Mr. Mo Husseini, who was originally scheduled to join today's panel and closing session, was unfortunately unable to attend. I do thank him, though, for his ongoing work in the field, and I hope to include him in future events. Now, let's continue with our usual scheduling. We are honored to welcome Jonathan Haranoff, Israel's spokesperson to the United Nations, who will be presenting a brief 15-minute overview of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict first to get us rolling. Professor Mohammed Dajani, founder of the Wasatiyah movement, and on regional power dynamics, he'll be speaking. Habtom Gebreskiaba, an expert in regional diplomacy and a PhD candidate at Hebrew University, who will be speaking on Israeli-Iranian strategic challenges. Susie Becker, the managing editor of the Palestine-Israel Journal, on key obstacles to peace. Next, we will have our panel discussion, where we will be joined by Yoav Shumakunz, an expert on European politics and Israel and Palestine, and the holder of a PhD. Again, Professor Dajani, and Stephen Aiello, founder of the Debate for Peace. We will then close with a forward-looking presentation to set up the basis for next week's conversations. Stephen Aiello will present proposals for geopolitical cooperation. Together, these people's insights represent a diversity of lived experience, professional expertise, and committed vision, and I am truly, deeply grateful to each of them for joining us today. And with that, let us begin, not with the final answers, but with the courage to ask better questions. Thank you. We'll begin our first segment, a series of presentations exploring the current geopolitical landscape and the factors shaping this conflict today. Our first speaker is Jonathan Haranoff, Israel's spokesperson to the United Nations. He'll be opening this session with an overview of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as it stands today. Jonathan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I start, I'd like to say a few words about the horrific terror attack that we saw in Washington, D.C. this past Wednesday and Thursday during the stadium. A beautiful young couple, Yaron and Sarah, a Jewish person and Christian who both worked at the Israeli embassy, were gunned down for no reason other than the Jewish event.
We can't understand, at least I can't understand what the voice, something with the microphone maybe. You, Susie, do you understand what is?
Yes, I think we're having a little bit of difficulty hearing you, Jonathan, but that is no problem. It might be on your end with the microphone. No pressure though. If it helps you, we could go on to the next speaker and come back to you, Jonathan, if that would help you. Awesome. Uh, well, if that's okay with you, Professor Mohammed Dajani, would you be able to present your piece?
Mute me. Yeah,
Thank you
okay.
very much.
Do you hear my voice well? Is that
Yes,
okay, the
yeah,
voice?
it's perfect. Thank you very much. We can hear you amazing.
Well, thank you, Inuka, for this opportunity to speak. I think that it's important that our voice reaches Australia and hopefully different parts of the world, the voice of peace building and peacemaking. I want to start with a narrative that took place a long time ago, back in the 1990s, when I was invited to be the facilitator for a group of Palestinian Israeli religious leaders, religious teachers also in schools and universities. And the meeting was held in Antalya. And first session that we held, people were very ignited, saying, "This is our land. You do not belong here," to the other. And it seems that it was not a dialogue; it was a monologue, and thus we were afraid that our efforts to bring people together has failed. And then I remember the quote by Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, in which he says, "What is more important, a big dream or a small hope?" So I just laid it on the table, asking them, what is more important, a big dream or a small hope? And they were confused because I didn't have an idea what is a big dream or what is the small hope, and the same was to with them. And when I noticed that the tension cooled down and people were ready to listen to each other, I explained to them, I improvised, telling them that the big dream is for an Israeli to wake up one morning and there are no Palestinians around, and Jerusalem will be the capital of Israel. And the big dream for the Palestinians is to wake up one morning and there are no Israelis around, and Al-Quds al-Sharif will be the capital of the state of Palestine from river to sea. But what is the problem with the big dream, or both, is that you have to annihilate the other. You have to have no other in order for you to have that big dream. And the question was, is that what you want as religious leaders? And the answer was, no, what is the small hope? The small hope was for both to wake up one morning and have two states, one state, three states, whatever, how many states, but rather, and people living in peace and coexistence and reconciliation. And so the question I raised to them, what do you want? Do you want the big dream or do you want the small hope? And all of them said we would want the small hope. We are not here to kill anybody and we do not envision wiping out the other. And so we agreed on the small hope. So every time anybody says you do not belong here, we tell them you are for the big dream, and they will say no, no, we are for the small hope. And this actually has become a model for conflict resolution in the sense of people wanting the big dream. And extremist Israelis are fighting today in Gaza to have this big dream from river to sea. And the Hamas people have started this conflict back in October to 2023 by wanting, thinking, imagining, envisioning to have a, an Islamic state from river to sea. So we have one side wanting a Jewish state, river to sea without the other, and the other wanting an Islamic state from river to sea without the other. Both of them, I believe, are wrong, and both of them will not achieve their goal. Basically, because not only that there are millions of people on this side and millions of people on the other side, but also because their objective is immoral. It is unachievable. And even if it may happen in their dreams, it will not happen in reality.
Really?
I was I was invited I was invited to go to Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia to speak about peace. And in Azerbaijan, I was told by the Azerbaijani that Armenia was part of Azerbaijan in the past, in the past history. When I visited Armenia, I was told Azerbaijan was part of Armenia. And both, I told them both that you have a big dreams, and these big dreams do not include the other. And this is not really what should be for the future. The past has passed. It is part of history books. And the present does not mean should teach us. We should learn from the present so that we have to move to the future. Now, what we need to do is to focus on the future and to think in terms of the future and not to let the past be an obstacle to the future. This is where we need to move on. Not to think in terms of how to kill the other and how to educate our children how to hate the other, but rather how to love the other, how to cooperate with the other, how to live with the other. And in this sense, this is the future we want. I was invited to go to speak in South Africa. And the day I was supposed to go to the university to speak, I was told that there has been threats against me and that I should not go. And I insisted on going because I said I had flown all these hours and I should go. So we went to the university, and once we entered the university, there was this big green courtyard, and it was divided by barrels of flowers into two parts. One tent for the pro-Palestine group and one tent for the pro-Israel group. And there was a lot of enmity and hatred between them. However, I noticed that I was told that all of them were South Africans. They were not Israelis, they were not Palestinians. And so when I started to speak, both groups came together, but not to hear or listen to the talk, but rather to disrupt the talk. And I addressed both of them, saying that instead of importing our conflict to your campus, why don't you export to us the rainbow of reconciliation that that you inherited from the great leader Nelson Mandela? South Africa could export a lot of things, but the most important is its vision of reconciliation that was left to it by Nelson Mandela. And I think that my words made a lot of effect on the people because both of them sat there and listened till my 2-hour lecture ended. Now the question is, how do we move from the past to the future? It was an insightful moment for me when on a Friday morning I was watching next to my house a checkpoint, an Israeli checkpoint, and it was forbidding Palestinians to go to Jerusalem. It was a Friday morning and it was Ramadan, and Palestinians were gathered at the checkpoint to go to Jerusalem in order to pray because they believe that it is blessed to pray on Friday and Ramadan. And the soldiers were not allowing them to go to cross the checkpoint because they did not have permits, and they were pushing them back, throwing at them tear gas, and I expected that they will shoot at them eventually. But the people were adamant, and the soldiers, it seems, changed their mind, and the officer at the checkpoint brought buses which allowed Palestinians to cross. They took their IDs, they checked them for weapons, and then they took the buses, went to Jerusalem to pray at Al Haram Sharif. They prayed there for their Friday prayers and came back with the buses to the checkpoint. They got their IDs and left home. To me, it was an inspiring moment because I felt this is a win-win situation. The Israelis, worried about security, had no problems of people crossing that checkpoint, and the Palestinians worried about missing their Friday Ramadan prayers. So both of them got what they wanted. So to me, it was a win-win situation. And that was the inspiration moment that got me to start creating a movement I called Wasatiyah. And Wasatiyah is a movement, it's an Islamic movement, but not necessarily religious, although its religion is the foundation for it, in which people will work for a win-win situation. So this is the solution for our conflict, is how to seek a win-win situation, not a win-lose situation or a lose-lose situation as what is happening in Gaza. Gaza war, whether it is the 7th of October or the war that came after it, are both losers, are both a lose-lose situation. Now, the question is how to move from this lose-lose situation to a win-win situation. In my view, and the day after, what we should do is that we should have Palestine, the state of Palestine, recognize the state of Israel, and the state of Israel recognize the state of Palestine. It is a myth in the minds of Israelis that peace is for the benefit of the Palestinians, or the recognition of the state of Palestine is in the sole benefit of the Palestinians. This is in both will win, and both will benefit from recognizing each other, because so far in the Oslo Accords, it was the PLO that recognized Israel, and the PLO does not exist anymore in reality. Now, so the recognition of Israel by the Palestinians is not there anymore. At the same time, the Israelis do not recognize the state of Palestine. So mutual recognition of the state of Palestine by the Israelis and the state of Israel by the Palestinian, this is the starting point. From there, we can move to elections, and we hope that these elections on both sides will bring in moderates. Moderates who believe in sharing the land and living in peace and coexisting and with reconciliation. This is the future that we want, and this is the future that we hope for. Now, the killing that's taking place today, whether on one side to the other, is not the answer to the next generation. What we want to do is to plant seeds of peace so that we can, in the future, reap flowers, not weeds. And in this way, we can move on to a better future. A king was walking in the fields and he saw this old man, and the old man was planting an olive tree. And the king said to him, "Old man, are you expecting to eat from the fruits of this tree?" And the old man responded, "Well, our grandparents planted, we ate, we plant, so our grandchildren will eat." The king liked that and he awarded him. And the old man said to him, "Can you see how speedy our plants, our seeds have given fruit?" So this is what we want. We want to plant today seeds of peace so that in the future we can reap flowers. Because if we plant weeds today, in the future we can never reap flowers. So if not for us, we should do it for our grandchildren. It's very important for us to believe in peace despite the odds. And we are living today in dark days, but we have to understand that at dawn it gets the most dark, and then the light of the sun comes up. So I believe that we are moving in a tunnel, and eventually we will be able to walk out of the tunnel. Now the question is, what are we going to walk out to see? Are we going out to see darkness or light? If we plant today seeds of peace, then we will see light. If we plant seeds of hate and enmity and racism and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, we will see darkness. Is that what we want to see? We have the choice, and we have to make up our mind. What future do we want to leave for our children? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That was, I'm not sure about everybody else, but that was very inspiring and a relief to see that people still have hope in our future. All right, we're going to go on to Jonathan and see if everything's working on his end. We'll see how it goes. Thank you.
Can you hear me now, Inuka?
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly now. Thank
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Before I start, I'd like to say a few words about the horrific terror attack that we saw in Washington, D.C. this past Wednesday, or Thursday if you're in Australia. A beautiful young couple, Yaron and Sarah, a Jewish person and a Christian who both worked at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., were gunned down for no reason other than being at a Jewish event. The sad reality is that as we learn more about these victims, we learn how both of them were committed to a sustainable, peaceful future in the Middle East, the kind of future that we're discussing here. And they, along with other young diplomats, were attending an event organized by the American Jewish Committee, focused on different peace building initiatives and ways to increase humanitarian aid going into Gaza. Our thoughts and prayers are with Yaron and Sarah's families and loved ones. I'd like to thank Inuka for putting together this very important conference and for all of your peace building efforts. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let me preface by saying that when it comes to the current geopolitical landscape in the Middle East, there is nothing that I personally want more than to see peace. And I commend genuine good faith efforts at peace building. And when I refer to peace, I'm not talking about temporary peace, namely a peace agreement that's haphazardly cobbled together, that's flawed, and struck between two parties not necessarily interested in long-term peace. I'm talking about real, lasting peace, the kind that sets the groundwork for a regional tranquility and prosperity that I am sure many Israelis and Palestinians are hoping to see one day. And I'm also hoping that we see that win-win situation that Mr. Dajani alluded to previously. After all, this is why I'm working at the United Nations to begin with. I do believe in the foundational mission of this global institution that was set up in the aftermath of the Second World War in order to maintain the international order and prevent another global calamity from occurring. Which is why, for me, it's especially disappointing to see some UN agencies and individuals steer away from their organization's mission statement and do more harm than good, including what we saw last week or the week before when a senior UN official falsely stated that there were 14,000 babies in Gaza who would die of hunger immediately within the next 24 hours. Of course, there is a hunger problem there, but that fact wasn't true about the 14,000 babies, and that was amplified by the media and led to an onslaught of hatred and condemnations lodged at Israel. And the tragic shooting that I referred to before that we saw in Washington, D.C. took place amid this storm of anti-Israel hostilities. And so for me, when I'm talking about hope, it's also important to balance that hope with pragmatism. And in order to have a constructive dialogue around peace in the Middle East, I do believe that there are a number of absolutes that have to take place first and be agreed upon for this latest conflict that we all find ourselves in. For starters, all 58 hostages who are still held in brutal Hamas captivity 600 days later must be released. This cannot be a negotiable point. On October the 7th, 2023, 250 of these innocent people were stolen from their homes, communities, and music festivals by Hamas, and another 1,200 more were murdered. And that massacre and nothing else was what unleashed this war that we are now in, and it should never have happened. Hamas knew what it was doing. It knew that Israel would retaliate, and it knew that its own people, the people of Gaza, would suffer while Hamas terrorists hid among them in schools and hospitals and other urban settings. And now, 18 months later, there is suffering in Gaza, and there is suffering in Israel. And Gazans are staging sporadic uprisings in protest of their leadership that has plunged them into this terrible war in the first place. That's the first thing that absolutely must happen, the release of the hostages, before one can have a serious conversation around peace. Because talking about peace without addressing this atrocious war crime of hostage taking is simply an act of futility. Next, Hamas has to go. The internationally designated terrorist group has reigned in Gaza since 2005 after defeating the Fatah party. And what has it done for the Palestinian people since? For there to be any shot at future peace, which I truly hope we do reach, Hamas can no longer be a political force in Gaza that threatens Israel's southern border and harms its own people. And I'm sure that there are critics of Israel who will say that Israel also has a leadership problem and that may be valid. But the difference is that there haven't been any elections in Gaza since 2005. Israel, on the other hand, is a democracy, and whether you support the current leadership or not, there is a democratic electoral process that has got us to where we are today. And there is certainly, if you look at today's political landscape inside Israel, there is certainly not always a nationwide consensus on who should lead Israel. In fact, that's why Israel held 5 elections in 4 years somewhere between 2018 and 2022. And I'd also like to cast your minds back to late September 2023, which feels like a lifetime ago. Just weeks before the October 7th massacre, Israel was on the cusp of a dramatic breakthrough in the expansion of the Abraham Accords and forging a historic peace deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And such a reconciliation between Jerusalem and Mecca, and a corridor between these two countries and everything in between, would have had extraordinary trade, communication, energy, and endless other benefits. But we knew throughout such discussions that the leaders in the Islamic Republic of Iran were willing to do whatever was necessary to thwart such an agreement that would transform the hegemonic landscape of the Middle East. And that explains why we've seen report after report showing Tehran's fingerprints all over Hamas's attacks and Tehran's support of its proxy terror network, including Hezbollah and the Houthis, in attacking Israel. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Inuka, I believe you've done some research and work on that topic as well.
Yeah, I have. Very interesting.
My presentation isn't as long as the previous one, but I do want to end on a positive note, and once again reiterate my gratitude for peace-seeking individuals like Inuka and all of you on this call. That for all the problems we continue to face in the Middle East, I am still hopeful for peace. I will continue to raise awareness about the plight of the hostages being held in Gaza by Hamas and the need for Hamas to go so that we can be on a real path to peace. And I'm still hopeful that the Abraham Accords are expanded, especially because such an agreement involving other nations in the Arab world will go a long way, in my opinion, in ending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for good. And thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Jonathan. Very, very interesting. And yes, I have looked into the Israeli-Iranian proxy conflict. It's a very, very interesting topic. So now I'd like to move on to Habitom, who will present a piece about Israel and Iran, which is very convenient, noting on the point we ended on. So thank you very much for that. The floor is yours.
Oh, do you hear me, guys? Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. Okay.
I think you're muted at the moment, Sai.
Now I think it's okay, right? Right.
Yep, we can hear you fine now.
So I'm going to talk about the geopolitical risk and the proxy dynamics within the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I live in Israel, and I'm from Eritrea, and so I'm from the Red Sea, the Horn of Africa, and I've been living in Israel for the last 18 years. I'm also a researcher and a PhD at the Hebrew University. So I'm going to talk about the dynamics. It's very interesting. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict now has shifted into also the Red Sea. It's becoming it is very interesting, the dynamics, the proxy dynamics of the conflict itself. Okay, so I start. I'm just opening the. So now the after the Gaza war, the Houthis in Yemen started attacking shipping in the Red Sea and also attacking Israel in the name of solidarity with the Palestinians, right? So that solidarity with the Palestinians served the Houthis. They became very, very popular in Yemen and also across the Arab world. And they use it as strategic influence. It's very strategic. It's very strategically very important for the Houthis. They also got a lot of financial backings, even intelligence from China. So the Palestinian conflict is not only now within the Middle East, but also in the Red Sea. But we know that in terms of demonstrations and non-violent demonstrations and things in Europe is common, but a real solidarity in fighting with Gaza, with Palestine, against Israel is for the first time. And it was already in the Middle East, but in the Red Sea, the Houthis are the first to see doing this. So Iran is actually using the Palestinian issue to challenge Israel. So you've got the Hezbollah, you've got the Hamas, and also now the Houthis. And that also could be now today the Iranians are also trying to get a stronghold in Sudan. In Sudan, they're trying to also. I don't know how it's gonna happen, but also the Al-Shabaab might also copy the Houthi model, because the Houthi model is successful in terms of them gaining a lot of popularity in Yemen. They are very popular in Yemen because the Palestinian people, the Yemeni people do support the Palestinian cause, and standing for Palestine in Yemen, it's something that gives you a lot of popularity. So Iran empowers groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and Houthi, and also tries to copy that model to Somalia and also Sudan. It's not only Iran that are helping the Houthis. For example, Eritrea was part of this country. The Eritrea is part of the resistance axis and was helpful in bringing the Houthis in Yemen to power. But also, for example, the Eritrean president openly endorsed the Houthis' attack against Israel as part of a resistance force. So it's not only Eritrea is actually the only non-Muslim Arab country that endorsed the Houthis' attack against Israel. So it's not only Iran, but also other countries are also or silently or openly support the attack against Israel by the Houthis, as they see it as part of a resistance and as part of supporting the Palestinian struggle. For example, Eritrea was very silent. Almost a third of the ships attacked by the Houthis in the Red Sea was in the territory, Eritrean water territory, sovereignty water. So the silence is also some sort of support for the Houthis, and they are doing this because it is as part of resistance, or as part of solidarity with the Palestinians. So as I said, the Houthis in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Houthis launched attacks on Israel from Yemen, justified as a solidarity with Gaza, and this expands Iranian influences beyond traditional fronts. The Iranian traditional fronts was Hamas, Hezbollah, some groups in Iraq and also in Syria. But now it also expands into the Red Sea region, and it could also be expanded. Like if the Houthi model is copied in Somalia by the Al-Shabaab, and if the Houthi model is copied by Islamists in Sudan, then it could also easily affect Egypt. So the dynamics is fluid. It could be distributed across the region, and Egypt is a different game, right? So already the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is expanded into the Red Sea. So now it's not only ideology, but also it includes geography and trade, right? A lot of ships are being attacked. The premium for many ships raise it. Shipping routes delayed. It's and affecting many people, and high prices and things. So for example, for Israel, it's the port of Elad is shut down. A missile strikes forces millions into shelters. Last time the Ben Gurion airport was attacked, and a lot of airplanes are cutting flights to Israel, and a lot of flights have canceled. So it's also have a lot of economic problems, burdens, not only to Israel but also all over the world, right? The Red Sea is the main ship route. So Egypt was one of these countries highly damaged by the closure of the Bab el Mandeb, or the attacks by the Houthis. But not only that, but its dynamics, not only that in terms of attacking ships and disrupting trade routes, but also not only also what is happening in Israel, but also have it's another dynamics within the region. Like for example, if you see the Gulf states, the Gulf states are now hesitant to oppose Iran publicly, right? Like for example, am I okay with time, Enoch?
You can probably go for 3 to 4 more minutes if that works with you.
Okay, thank you. So the
Yes.
Gulf states, for example, you see, they refused to join the US in attacking the Houthis, right? So they're very afraid. Egypt, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. But also they are now, like for example, the Saudis, they used to support the Trump, they supported Trump to get out of the JCPOA, but now they're working to help him make a deal with Iran, right? So and also look at so the dynamics of the proxy, the Houthis changed the dynamics of the geopolitics of the region, including the Gulf states vis-a-vis Israel, and the Gulf states vis-a-vis Iran. Not only that, recently the US made a deal with the Houthis because you can also do anything with the Houthis, because air strikes cannot address the Houthis problems, right? It's difficult because the Saudis tried almost a decade, spent between 100 to 300 billion dollars, and they just made a deal into the Houthis terms. Another side of it is the Abraham Accord. The Abraham Accord is under pressure, right? The idea of the Abraham Accord was to overpass Ramallah and connect Jerusalem with Riyadh. Now it's not only a Ramallah, the Hamas attack and also the Houthis attack. Now it makes not only Ramallah is overpassed, but also Jerusalem is overpassed, and it becomes between Washington and Riyadh. So all these things, so it also affected the Abraham Accord under pressure. And also, like the US made a deal with the Houthis without consulting Israel, leaving Israel to deal with it, because for the US it's a lot of burden. They just lost about $7 billion in less than 2 months, 2 years. So the proxy dynamics, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict proxy dynamics has shifted a lot of things, much more than people expected. Look, Egypt became very sensitive to Iranian influence. Because they are the ones with the biggest damage in terms of by closing the Suez Canal. But still they refused to join the Americans in terms of attacking the Houthis. They just became very sensitive to the Iranian influence, right? So the conflict, the proxy dynamics, the Iranian proxy dynamics within the region has made a multi-front threats: Lebanon, Gaza, Yemen, Syria, and it could also be Somalia, Sudan, and even get to Egypt. So it could give a potential broader regional war. It's not only that, also global powers, like for example, China. There was a report in Washington Post, I think in the New York Times, or in Financial Times, in one of them, that the Chinese gave intelligence to the Houthis. Some of them are also financing Houthis because they don't want their ships to be attacked. China uses the Red Sea a lot, so they try to make a deal with the Houthis in order to get their ships pass through the Red Sea without being attacked, without being targeted. Of course, later the US also did the same thing. So also global powers. So these proxies, they are becoming very powerful, not only in terms of the support, the popularity within the population and within the Arab Muslim world, but also from powerful global countries like China, like Russia, but also even the Americans at the end, they surrendered to the Houthis. So if this continues, it is possible that proxies like the Houthis, it is for Iranians, it's a very limited investment, but it has huge success in terms of it's successful. It's what it gets from the Houthis. So it could go and make such kind of proxies in the Horn of Africa, in Djibouti is actually under the Chinese, but the Horn of Africa are highly fragile countries. Like Sudan is fragile; it's been in conflict for the last 60 years. Somalia is in conflict. Yemen is in conflict, tribal clan conflict. So Iran could use these countries and even not only put pressure on countries like Israel, but also destabilize countries like Egypt, and even make the conflict much more worse. So this is the situation. The Iranians, they saw that it's a win-win situation, so they're going to continue. So at the end of the day, in my conclusion, Iranian proxies are reshaping the Middle East dynamics. The Israeli conflict, Palestinian conflict became weaponized by not only states as like in the past, like Saudi, the Arab countries, they use the Palestinian issue as a pawn. But now, not only states like Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, or Emirates or Egypt, but also non-state actors are now weaponizing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And doing this, it's not only regional, but global stakes are growing. It's not only at a regional level. It's not only but it's at a global stake. Like the Chinese has to deal with it. The Americans has to deal with it. They have to even at times work with the non-state actors. So it has also regional and international response. So I think this is my conclusion. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, we're welcome.
Thank you very much. We'll definitely have some questions relevant in the panel section, which will come up after Susie Becker gives her speech. So we're looking forward to that. So Susie, it's up to you. Thank you very much for speaking.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing this event and for inviting me to speak. And it looks like Jonathan isn't here anymore, but I think you're going to find quite a bit of daylight between us, even though we're both Israelis. But that's the whole purpose of holding this dialogue.
Yeah.
So I'll get on with it. Before talking about the obstacles, I've been invited to talk about key obstacles. I just want to say a few words about my worldview. I believe in the right of all peoples to self-determination. Self-determination means that a people defines itself, so it's not up to the Because I believe in self-determination, I support the two-state solution as the best solution to the conflict. It's not the ideal solution. I don't think there is any such animal, but I think it's the most practical and probably the fairest one. When he was introducing me, Inuka said that I'm the managing editor of the Palestine-Israel Journal, but in addition, I'm the communications director of a group called the Policy Working Group, which advocates for international engagement in order to secure a resolution of the conflict. So that'll fit into my remarks as I go along. Getting to the obstacles, I'm actually going to in that it gave 2/3 of the territory between the river and the sea to 1/3 of the population. And then half a century later, we saw this historic exchange of letters between PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, in which Arafat recognized the state of Israel, while Rabin recognized the PLO. So we had legitimate state on one side and legitimate organization on the other. And this inequality that we saw from the outset, we can even go back to the Balfour Declaration, it continues to grow as time goes on. Since the collapse of the Oslo process, Israel has been ruled by right-wing governments with little interest in resolving the conflict with the Palestinians. Prime Minister Olmert began negotiations with President Abbas, but those talks took place under the shadow of an impending criminal indictment against Olmert, and he resigned before anything was concluded. Quite astoundingly, Benjamin Netanyahu, who won the elections in 2009 after Olmert's resignation, has remained in power since that time, except for 1 year in which a so-called government of change basically changed nothing and held to the position that the conflict with the Palestinians could be managed, meaning that the status quo could be maintained. Netanyahu returned to power in December 2022 and formed a coalition with the extreme right, whose guidelines all the land between the river and the sea belongs exclusively to the Jewish people and vowed to advance Jewish settlements throughout the territory. So if you're looking for obstacles to peace, you could actually stop right there. Before going further into what is happening in Israel today, I'd like to zoom out and look at the responsibility of the international community, which for years condemned Israeli settlement in the OPT, but did nothing to stop it, enabling successive governments to grow increasingly arrogant in their defiance of international law. Recently, there have been signs that Europe has come to the end of its rope. See whether sanctions will actually be imposed. Another thing to watch is the upcoming French-Saudi-sponsored summit on recognition of the state of Palestine that's scheduled for June. Recognition would help reduce the inequality that I mentioned earlier. But if the summit concludes with a declaration of commitment rather than actual recognition, the obstacle of disparity between the sides will remain. And then there's President Trump. After Netanyahu's first trip to DC, many thought annexation was in the bag. The euphoria was short-lived, however, because Trump summoned Netanyahu in April and notified him on live TV that he went ahead and cut a deal with the Houthis, and after that he took off on a grand tour of the Gulf, basically telling Netanyahu, "Eat my dust." However, we have to be aware of drawing conclusions about U.S. policy. Trump's only interest is the greenback dollar, And just as he flip-flops between Zelensky and Putin, his Middle East BFFs are also going to change depending on who can offer him the best profit margin at any given time. Going back to what's happening in Israel, Netanyahu's opposition to Palestinian statehood didn't begin on October 7th. In his 2015 election campaign, he declared that there would never be a Palestinian state on his watch, and he hasn't deviated from that position. So there you go. The greatest obstacle to peace at this time, and as an Israeli, I say this with sorrow and trepidation, is the Prime Minister of Israel. As noted before, however, by another speaker, Israel, I believe it was Jonathan, Israel is a democracy, even if I believe it's a very flawed one, and its government is chosen at the ballot box. That means that we need to examine how public opinion in Israel shifted from majority support for a peace agreement, at times a small majority, but majority nonetheless, the turning point was the failure of the Camp David summit and the outbreak of the Second Intifada. The Israeli peace camp collapsed as Palestinian partners took up arms again, and most of the general public bought Prime Minister Barak's version of events. The narrative that there is no Palestinian partner took hold and lives on to this day. On the heels of the no partner myth came the unilateral disengagement from Gaza and the birth of the story that when given independence, the Palestinians choose terrorism over peace. Never mind that Israel imposed a siege and exerted control over everyone and everything that entered or left Gaza. In the Israeli narrative, this became another example of the Palestinians missing an opportunity. After the last attempt at negotiations failed in 2014, successive Netanyahu governments entrenched the occupation through settlement expansion, discriminatory legislation, and subtle changes that remove the conflict from the public consciousness. The armistice line disappeared. The name West Bank was replaced with Judea and Samaria. Palestinian civilian casualties became the uninvolved rather than innocent victims, and alleged terrorists were neutralized rather than killed. A new generation of Israelis went about its business with lack of awareness or indifference to the persecution taking place across the border. And the Abraham Accords, which have been referred to previously as well, in my view, boosted Netanyahu's contention that Israel's integration into the region is not dependent on a resolution of its conflict with the Palestinians. And then came October 7th. Israel's indefensible conduct of the Gaza war, the casualty toll, the humanitarian crisis, the hate speech coming from the highest echelons, all of these contributed to wiping out the global sympathy and understanding for the trauma suffered by the Israelis on that horrific day. In Israel, however, the nightmare that began with the atrocities perpetrated by Hamas was amplified by the shock over the intelligence failure, the ineptness of the military, and the callousness of the government. 20 months later, the Israeli public is gripped by despair, fearing for the hostages, having no faith in the government, and believing that the Palestinians aim to annihilate them. The majority want Netanyahu gone, but the pre-Oslo notion that territory equals security is back in full force. And so whatever government replaces Netanyahu is unlikely to have implementation of the two-state solution on its agenda. It's important to understand that it's not that the Israelis no longer want peace. They no longer believe that it's possible. Fears are not totally groundless. Jihadi terrorism is real, and Hamas's refusal to disarm is not an indication of peaceful intentions. Furthermore, 77 years of statelessness and 58 years of occupation have eroded the Palestinian public's belief in diplomacy and increased support for violence, especially among the younger generation. It should go without saying that I'm not condoning violence, but I understand how hatred can take root when the only Israelis a Palestinian has ever seen are those who come to harass, humiliate, evacuate, arrest, or shoot them. A poll published in September 2024 and so the obstacles pile up. I've talked at length about Netanyahu, but we also have to recognize that President Abbas's term in office, which began 21 years ago, has not exactly inspired confidence in his commitment to democracy. Abbas also recently appointed a deputy, possibly anointing a successor in preparation for his eventual demise. So we can add to our list of obstacles the absence of a leader who enjoys legitimacy in the eyes of the Palestinian people. Our time is limited. There are many, many more obstacles, but I think I've touched the key ones. So I'd like to conclude with this thought. Peace could be within reach if the Israeli Prime Minister were to say three little words: Palestinian state now. That would set out a domino effect in which all the obstacles would come tumbling down one after the other. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Susie. That was very enlightening, and I think it's very, very interesting to think about the key obstacles, although there's undoubtedly many more. It was very interesting. So now we're going to move on to our panel section, which we will extend by about 5 minutes. So instead of being 25 to 30, it'll be 30 to 35, just to consider that Mo Husseini, as I mentioned, was unable to attend. So he would have been a panelist, but we will, of course, go ahead nonetheless. So how it will work is I will start by asking a few questions which I've personally thought up while I've been in this meeting, I think, and then we will go on and see if the audience has any other questions or any of the other speakers for the three panelists, and we will go from there. So the first panel question I have for Professor Mohammed Dajani, Yoav Shemokunz, and Stephen Aolo are we often hear, that peace is blocked not just by the other side, but by internal politics. What is one political or ideological fracture within your own community that you think needs to be addressed before peace can move forward? So I'll leave it up to you. What's one obstacle or one aspect of the conflict in your community which you think needs to be addressed first? Yep, there you go.
Mohammed, you go first, Mohammed, or
Okay. Yeah.
okay.
I believe it is education. It's very important that we can promote the curriculum in order to promote peace and reconciliation. So far, the curriculum was education for war, and then it moved to education of conflict, and then now it is supposed to be education for peace, which it is not. And I believe it should be also wasatiyya education, where we teach our children how to live, not how to die, and how to enjoy life, and how to end the enmity, the hatred, the racism, uh, and thus I believe it all lies in how we develop our educational uh, curriculum. In this sense, it's so important that we do reform the curriculum so that we can bring a different generation. One Israeli told me that one of the Hamas people when called his mother while he was on October 7th in that rage, saying, I'm killing Jewish people. And he asked me, what did he mean? I said, what he meant is that they are taught that Jews have incurred God's anger, and once they kill Jews, then they please God. And this is part of their education. And this is where education plays such an important role in how people think and how their psyche is being brought. And thus, it is so important to change that hate curriculum into understanding curriculum and to be able to move on with that. So I believe it is, if you are talking about one main thing, I believe it's education, how we should change education in order to bring a better generation. And we should not do it to please the Europeans or the Americans or the Israelis. We should do it in order to bring a better generation for our people. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Who would like to go next?
Yeah, I can go next, perhaps.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, so just first, it's very, very awkward and strange to discuss peace and reconciliation in times of such a genocide ongoing. And the spokesperson of the Israeli government for the United Nations was actually in this panel. And I find this very strange. You talked about track 2 negotiations for peace, and we have track 1 genocidal state official spokesperson for the United Nations. So he might be maybe accused of, war crimes or participation in war crimes, defending this genocide, which he did also in this panel just an hour ago. So I find this personally quite outrageous and scandalous. So I had to react to that, and also to start with the latest murder of children in Gaza, the news from Khan Yunis with the 9 children and 9 brothers, and which were burned, and they cannot even identify the bodies. So this is the context where we are now, and this is very strange to discuss other issues than what is going on as we speak now in Gaza, including starvation of entire population. This is a genocide. It's not a question anymore. It's not a judicial question anymore. It's a political question. And I find that a bit awkward that this conversation takes place in such a convenient and comfortable environment, while Israeli military is committing war crimes and crimes against humanity, against an entire civilian population. We just had lunch here with my children, my wife. We are very comfortable, but we have to acknowledge there are children and families in Gaza. They have nothing, and they face starvation. This is by the Israeli regime. So this is, I feel very shameful as an Israeli citizen of what is going on. I agree with Muhammad about education. I grew up in Israel, I grew up in Jerusalem, and I was indoctrinated to believe in Zionism, which is a racist ideology, a very colonial ideology. And Susie mentioned that now we call the West Bank Judea and Samaria, and we ignore even the occupation of the West Bank. I grew up also believing that the Palestinians fled the war in 1948, and only later I understood that it was state regime lies. They lied about the Nakba, about 1948, and how they ethnically cleansed the land of Palestine when they created the Zionist state in which I grew up, and where I served also the military of the Israeli regime. But the whole regime is based on lies, basically, on historic lies, on hiding the truth from the citizens, on make them believe stories, nice stories if you want to believe them, but not in line with history and archives findings, including today. And also, I was educated and learned to be afraid of the Palestinians. I was educated not to understand what they speak, not to understand their language. We grow up in Israel with education that educates future soldiers to enroll in the Israeli military, thinking we have no choice. They don't teach Arabic to children in Israel, and they do that in purpose, because their war is for eternity. And this is indeed what's going on now in Gaza and in the West Bank as well. So as Susie said before as well, the two-state solution is no longer on the agenda at all in Israel. Very far from it. What is on the agenda is total annexation of the West Bank and ethnic cleansing of Gaza. This is ongoing now. It's not a project or idea or a dream. This is the reality if you look in the news every day. So the reality is, in the end, we have one land from the river to the sea, which is called, you could call it Israel-Palestine, you can call it Palestine, historically you can call it Eretz Israel, whatever you want to call it. But this is a small territory with two peoples. As Susie said as well, I also believe in self-determination. And both peoples need to have self-determination. At the moment, we only have self-determination for one people, which is the Jewish Israeli ethnic group or national group. This is also in fundamental law since the nation-state law of 2018. And we have an apartheid state, basically, from the river to the sea. Apartheid, a system of systematic structural discrimination of one people against another. Israel is not a democracy. I disagree with this conception. It's a democracy only if you ignore almost now 60 years. 60 years of military occupation is no longer military occupation. It's permanent annexation, which is completely against international law. And the only path for peace that I see, which is based on international law. International law, implementation of the resolutions of the United Nations, implementation of the resolutions and advisory opinion of the ICJ in The Hague. I mean, there's no point in negotiations. I think the Israeli government could have left or could have retreated from the occupied territories decades ago. They took a decision to colonize the West Bank and to create settlement in the West Bank. It's not a mistake or a misunderstanding. This is the policy of the last few decades. We are facing now a situation of a one-state reality, which is not a solution for anything because it's not a just solution. It's not a sustainable solution. It's apartheid regime, which is extremely violent, extremely racist. We have now more than 70 people already tortured to death in torture camps, including Sde Teiman, but not only Sde Teiman. We have a whole network of torture camps in Israel. We're talking about almost 10,000 people in these torture camps all across the country. I'm in favor of getting all these people back home to their families, and including obviously the people who are held in Gaza. I think I conclude, I agree with Susie of the three words Palestine state now, but I also think, and I see the reality, that it's very improbable and very far from being imagined that Israel will suddenly turn 180%, 180 degrees change of all its policy until now. I think the more likely would be a path for some kind of institutional engineering of sharing the land, power sharing mechanism between the two peoples in some kind of a federal system that we can imagine and be also inspired by countries like Belgium, Switzerland, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stephen, what's your take on what's one obstacle that you can see in your community?
Sure. I'm going to cheat since Mo's not here and say one for Israelis and one for Palestinians, but I'll keep it short. On the Israeli side, Yoav touched on it. I think fear, to me, fear is just, unlike Yoav, I didn't grow up here. I moved here about 15 years ago, and I kind of have an outsider perspective. I look at it and I just see generational trauma. It's like Jewish history, Holocaust, and then 75 years of intractable conflict. Reflected in a generational fear, and needless to say, October 7th did not help. And that fear, it prevents willingness to make concessions and the courage that you need to make peace. On the Palestinian side, I think freedom of speech, like Palestinian society needs to be free in the sense of free speech. And we're not always going to like what's said. Government's not always going to like what's going to be said, but in order to have diversity of views, there has to be freedom of speech, and it doesn't exist. For 11 years now, I'm publishing things written by Gazans online, changing names and details because they're afraid of their own, neighbors, government, etc. So yeah, I think that's what both sides kind of need. In that vein, I'll just say I just do disagree strongly with how you are represented Zionism, because I think obviously there's a lot of critiques to be made, and we should be the ones making critiques of our own government. As as was pointed out earlier, um, you know, we choose our government. So we have some very problematic people in some very influential positions, and whether we choose them individually as a collective, we chose them, and that's on us. But ultimately, I think it's ahistorical to say that Zionism is the connection of the Jewish people to this land, and I think part of us making peace is that both people need to accept the connection of the other people. We need to stop denying that the other side is connected and just acknowledge that there can be two complementary, two overlapping connections to this land, which is that the Jewish people have a long connection here, the Palestinian people have a long connection here. Those don't need to be a conflict. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Amazing. Well, it's very, very interesting to have these conversations. Um, Now we're going to have a brief 5 minute break, right, an intermission, to let everybody refresh as such. And then we will get straight back in with another question, which is on the more geopolitical landscape. We'll do one more question from me, and then while we're in this 5 minute break, it's the audience can put their questions into the chat, and when we get back, we'll have a look at them as well. So I will see you guys all in 5 minutes. Can't wait. We'll start the questions in about 1 to 2 minutes. So that's an update for you.
Can you repeat the question again, Inuka?
Oh, I was just saying we're going to start the questions in 1 to 2 minutes.
Yeah, I asked if you can repeat just the question that you asked before the pause.
Oh, before the
Yeah.
break. Okay. Yeah, so the question I asked was, I don't have the exact quote because I came up with it on the spot, but it was if you could choose one thing in your community or in your opinion really, that needs to be changed or addressed to fix the conflict or at least make steps towards it, what would that be? That was essentially the question.
No, I think you meant the next question. The next.
Yes, I did. I meant the following one, the second one.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Um, so the next one, which is, I guess if everyone else is, yep, I think everyone's back now. So the question, which is more on regional dynamics, is what role should the United States, in your opinion, play in the next phase of peace building? Should it be more hands-on or more hands-off? And if you can give a brief explanation of why, that'd be awesome. So I guess we'll go in the same order. So Dejani, if you want to start us off, that'd be awesome. Thank you very much.
Well, I believe the United States, the first step it should do is to recognize the state of Palestine. Once it does that, then it will start the process of peace. A second way, it should support peace builders and peace leaders within both societies. I believe so far the United States have been supporting more the war leaders. It's time for it to support the peace leaders and to move on within the system. At the same time, I believe that the United States should try to empower the civil society in order that to promote democracy within both countries. I think that we do not understand the meaning of democracy. And I think it's time for us to learn that lesson, that democracy means much more than what it really is so far. And to feel deep, yeah. For instance, people say Israel is a democracy, yet I see all these demonstrations taking place uh, without any effect, without any effect on the government or to do any change within the system. So what is if the voice of the people? And then you notice that it is minorities who are leading the government in Israel and authoritarianism in Palestine. So basically, we need to let the Americans go back to the 50s and 60s, where their focus was on promoting democracy, while today it is promoting wars abroad. And it is time for it to change that policy to promote peace. Trump said he would promote peace, but when we are looking at his policies, we do not see any promotion of peace. We hope that he will put his his policies is where his mouth is, in the sense of trying to end the war in Ukraine and to end the war in Gaza and to move on, really ending like he helped ending the war in India and Pakistan. So that's hopefully, we hope that this would be U.S. policy for the future, to be a policy of peace, not war. Thank you.
Awesome. Before we move on, Susie, I think you raised your hand. Did you have a question you want to quickly add in?
No, I actually wanted to comment. I'm not supposed to be one of the panelists, but this issue of the United States, I could slow when I hear it. So is it okay if I speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah, that should be fine.
Okay, because in my view, the United States under the Trump administration has to be left as far from peace talks anywhere in the world as possible. Okay, his America First attitude, yes, let them recede into isolationism, that's fine, because Trump has proven all he cares about, number one, his ego, of course, you have to flatter him enough, and number two is the bottom line. And he has so much harm to what we call the rules-based international order, based on universal values, which the entire Western world has been operating according to them and trying to instill them in other areas. He is taking us in the exact opposite direction. Justice doesn't come into the picture. His slogan is peace through strength. And peace through strength means might makes right. And so my opinion is I hope the US backs off and lets people who have values and believe in morality and justice and equality, let them run the negotiations. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Yoav, what do you think the role of the US should be?
Yeah, it reminded me of United Nations Security Resolution 2334 of 2016. And the only reason this Security Council resolution actually passed in the UN Security Council is because Barack Obama at the time decided not to veto the decision. It was a very, very rare moment in the UN Security Council. The United States did not veto a decision. So it was a good progress. It was a step towards some kind of more balance, or more to give more power and more possibility to international law and to UN resolution, and to stop maybe, or to try to stop the settlement project in the West Bank, this UN Security Council resolution. But it was only due to the fact that the US did not veto it. So I would say that I would agree somehow with Susie. The less the US interferes, and the less bombs it sends, and the less military aid it sends to Israel, the better. I am in favor of a total arms embargo. It's not only a question of being in favor, it's necessary due to the risk of genocide already announced a year ago. So the arms industry and the arms trade with Israel is a very, very crucial element that allows Israel to continue its war. We have now some voices for the international community in Europe about maybe suspending the EU-Israel Association Agreement, to revise it because of the Article 2 on human rights clause. Also, question of arms trade. Some member states are a bit worried that if they continue arms trade with Israel, they might be accused of assisting and not preventing genocide to the Palestinian people. So we have some kind of legal consequences of the procedures in the ICJ. And to the questions also in the chat, I think this is, I would say, my answer to that. The international community should, I would say, implement and ensure the full implementation of the ICJ advisory opinions and also orders, and also the ICC, obviously, the International Criminal Court, should also implement its arrest warrants. And I'm sure there will be other arrest warrants that will come against other ministers in the Israeli current government. and the international community is doing a lot of harm to Israel by giving it a complete green light, committing all these crimes. These are not only against the Palestinians, this is suicidal also for the Jewish Israelis. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Stephen, what's your take on the US's role in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Thank you. So I'm an American and an Israeli. When I vote in American elections, I try to vote for the person I think is best for the US. When I vote in Israeli elections, I try to vote for the person I think is best for Israel. And I would use the same in my answer here. I think the US, frankly, should do whatever is best for American interests. I think the US government should do what's best for American citizens. That's the allegiance of the US government. If I would answer as an Israeli, um, as it's been mentioned, strengthening civil society definitely. We're not gonna make these changes without strong civil society on both sides. I think the U.S. actually has been very good at that in the past. I personally work very closely with the Public Diplomacy Office and the U.S. Embassy. They give us a ton of support, and it's not just us. They support a lot of initiatives. Unfortunately, USAID has been shuttered, and there's a lack of appreciation for diplomacy. More generally, I think, as an Israeli, I think what the U.S. can do is to just be a good friend. If when you see your friend making a mistake, you don't say, "Okay, I'm just going to let them live through it." You point out the mistake, especially when it's a severe mistake. And I think the way the Israeli government kind of has been responding the last year and a half is basically it's watching your friend under influence get behind the wheel of the car. That's kind of what's been happening. And so I do think the U.S., as such a close partner of Israel, has a place and a responsibility to be a voice of reason to Israeli decision makers, even when they don't want to hear it, even when it's difficult. And also to speak from experience. The U.S. has fought in Afghanistan, fought in Iraq. The U.S. can kind of save Israel from making some of these mistakes. So I think that's what the U.S. could be doing, which as an Israeli I would appreciate. And also to address the questions in the chat, I think in terms of the international community, and this goes for governments and individuals. Ultimately, this is our conflict. I'll get this also when I speak later. This is an Israeli-Palestinian conflict going to be resolved by Israelis and Palestinians, hopefully sooner rather than later. But no one can force a resolution on us. What outsiders can do is to help us get there, and I think that the role, whether it's civil society or governments abroad, is to help Israeli and Palestinian civil society and government realize that this is not a zero-sum game. This is not like one side's going to win, one side's going to lose. That's not going to happen. This is the best future for Israelis is the best future for Palestinians, realistically, as Professor Giovanni pointed out. So I think both sides kind of need to be made to realize, as Susie said earlier, you're not going to get your perfect ideal solution, but you should sooner rather than later reach a compromise that leads to a better future for your side, which is going to be the best option on the table for the other side also. I do think maybe outsiders can help us to reach that realization, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Did somebody else have a comment to add on that?
I wanna add on this a simple comment, like
Okay. Yep.
on the U.S. involvement on the peace or on the. Okay, so look, the United States has the carrots and the sticks to pressure countries, including Israel. But now the United States is leaving the Middle East, and the non-state actors are increasingly coming into power, right? So the United States does not have the carrots and sticks on non-state actors. So it's a very troubling dynamics. In fact, if the U.S. is leaving the Middle East or the U.S. is leaving the peace, being as a peace mediator. So that's a very, I mean, we have to also think not only in terms of the U.S. as being supporter of the state of Israel, but also the U.S. is also sometimes prejudice Israel. And if the U.S. leaves the regime, it's not only leaves the Israeli and Palestinian issue, but also it leaves Jordan, which is also could also fall into non-state actors, also Egypt. So the U.S. we have to see it in terms of a bigger image, a bigger umbrella, rather than looking into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and that it's only supporting Israel and it's only damaging the Palestinians. So we have to see it in terms of a bigger image, and I think if it's possible for the U.S. to stay in the peace deal, it's great. Otherwise, it's gonna take a different dynamics. That's what I want to say.
Amazing. Well, thank you for that.
May I comment, Inuka?
Yeah,
Also, I
sure.
want to comment on what Susie said. Well, if you look at the United States and you look, there is Trump, who is the president, and then there is the US institutions. So if you are looking at Trump embodying all the US, it's like talking also about Israel as if it is embodying all the political parties, where actually it is an alliance of extremist parties. What I mean is that we let us try to distinguish the policies of Trump from the deep state. When Carter came to power, when he was running in the elections, he said about the state of Palestine. And then when he became president, he forgot about it because the deep state was against it. Now, the same thing now, today, is that the deep state is there, and Trump policies, he is making so many policies that are disagreeable. Look at what's happening with the issue of Harvard. And I think that the people are telling him enough is enough, no, for for his policies towards Harvard. So this is where I believe that we have to make the distinction between the erratic policies of the president sometimes and the real policies of the institutions. And I think what is running America is not the president, but the institutions. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you for that. So I think we'll quickly have one more question, which you've all hinted at already, and then we'll move on to the final section, which is on the role of international actors, I guess. So Jeanette's question was, what do you see as the primary role of the international community? Do you see points of leverage that aren't being used to their full power? So I guess we'll quickly go on to that if you have anything to add to what you've said earlier, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, maybe I can briefly take on that. And there was also it was also discussed beforehand. I think Hampton was saying that people stand up in solidarity with the Palestinian people in the Arab world, in Yemen, for instance, and in obviously other Arab countries. But we see that also in Europe. I see that where I live now in Europe, more and more people, more and more the civil society stand up and showing their solidarity with the Palestinian people. This is a very wide phenomenon, which is explaining why governments, even center-right governments that were very loyal to the Zionist regime until quite recently, change now their position and suddenly request to end complicity, maybe, or maybe possible sanctions or something like that. I think there's a great role for the international community, especially civil society. We have seen this very much with the boycott, disinvestment, sanctions movement that started from Ramallah in 2005 and it had I would say, quite a large impact in civil society across the world. And this idea of actually taking a position on this situation and not continue business as usual is a very simple idea, but I think it's trickled down, and now it's more and more understood that complicity with Israel is no longer an option. Even as I said before, even legally, this is becoming more and more complicated and maybe risky for the West because of what's the legal procedures in The Hague. Israel is definitely losing its propaganda war in the West. This is a complete failure due to its genocidal reaction after the 7th of October attack, and the explicitly racist and supremacist government it has. They do damage to themselves. But the community, international community, I think now is there's a shift. What we see in the recent month and even weeks, and I think from what I see also with my students, American students, the young generation didn't grow up like us in the Oslo Accords time, or knowing any other possibility or hope for peace as was in the 90s. The young generation now, also in the United States, liberal, progressive youth are seeing only apartheid and only a criminal state that killing civilians. So I think that Israel has lost this, and I think it could not bring it back. I think the symbolic capital and the kind of I would say support and nostalgia and all this socialist also sympathy to the kibbutz society and the socialist and the Labour Party, all what we had still until I would say the year 2000 more or less. This capital is lost, and I think that's why the Israeli regime is basically losing all its support in the West. I think it's a question of time when the next generation will come to power, the generation of younger people. They no longer suffer in a way, or less, from the weight of the Holocaust guilt that their parents were carrying with them. Israel has changed enormously since I left Israel some 20 years ago. I think Israel changed completely. It became really a pariah state, a rogue state that nobody will like to visit or normalize relations with. I see it here at the local level, in my city council. I see it in France. I see it in Europe. And I think we will see also changes later on in the United States. Thank you.
Amazing. So we'll now move on to Dajani, if you have any more comments, and then Stephen, and then we will move on to the final presentation of the night.
I'd like to comment on the role of the media, because I think the media is playing an important role. Israeli officials are denying what's happening on the ground. So when journalists ask them about it, they say it is lies, it's not true, this is not happening, and there is no genocide, there is no killing. But then the pictures keep coming up, not only pictures of those who were killed every day, but their names. They are not numbers. They are human beings with names, with families, and all that. So basically, I think that in Vietnam, once there was this picture published about kids running away from from American bombs, and it made a lot of effect. Another picture was for South Vietnamese shooting a prisoner, a North Vietnamese prisoner. They were, isolated pictures, then yet they left a lot of impact on US public. And the same thing today, what the Israeli government is not appreciating is that there are hundreds of these pictures are being bombarded into the West and into the social media, which is affecting how people feel, and it is actually increasing the anti-Semitism that's spreading around the world. And only by ending this war and by putting and by reaching an agreement in which Hamas should not play a role in the future, but rather that today there should be an end to have the hostages being exchanged or being released for for whatever cost it takes. Yet these are human beings. They are under so severe stress, and people should not play pawns with them. And I think that it is so important that we should move on by ending this with any method. It can be through diplomacy, because this war will not end through violence or through war, but rather through diplomacy. And I hope that people will understand what is going on. People used to say, we left Gaza and the bombs kept coming and the rockets kept coming. But you left Gaza with unilateral policy. You did not give a chance for diplomacy. So Hamas took credit for it. And so you gave the credit to Hamas. And so the same thing here. You have to think in terms of what is happening. These people who are in Gaza are not Hamas, and you are punishing them for those people who are hiding in the tunnels. And that's not fair. And this is what you need to understand, that these people are human beings, are not ideologues. And your ideologue are hiding in the tunnels, and it is time for you to make a deal where they will end. I don't think they are ready to come back. There is nothing for them to come back to. And as a result, I don't think they are willing to come back and take the responsibility of what they have done. Yet it is time for Israel really to take a stand regarding this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So, Stephen, it's up to you. What do you think the role of international players should be?
Sure, and again, I'll be brief because I'm going to touch on this later as well. I think, generally speaking, be strategic. So, international players should envision the future that they want, and then reverse engineer how are we going to get there. You know, so if we want a two-state solution, healthy relationship, successful economy in 20 years, let's make a 20-year plan to get there. You know, what are the steps that are going to get us there? If we think that, you know, maybe this isn't going to work with a two-state solution, there should be a three-state solution or a one-state solution. Whatever you believe in, have a long-term plan, because what neither side here has right now is any kind of long-term plan. I mean, there's no 5-year, 10-year, 20-year plan here. So that is, I think, an outsider's perspective that can help. I'll just quickly briefly touch on something that was in a comment we didn't get to talk about, but there was asked a question about peace versus justice. Not necessarily one or the other, but in terms of priorities, which comes first. This is actually something that we've talked about a lot in the PhD program that I'm in, which I must give credit, and then thanks to Professor Giuliani, who kind of inspired it. And I think I understand the idea that you have to hold out for justice, but as Susie's pointed out in the chat here, both sides have done horrible things to each other over the last century. And there are victims who had nothing to do with the perpetrators, and this is true on both sides. You may never achieve full justice. Who knows? But it's a lot easier to be outside the conflict and kind of be stubborn and say, well, let's hold out for justice. But for the people who are living here, who are suffering on both sides, and I've lost friends on October 7th. I've lost friends who were soldiers fighting in Gaza. I've lost friends who were Palestinians living in Gaza who had nothing to do or in the wrong place at the wrong time. I've lost Palestinian friends in the West Bank. I've lost Jewish friends to terrorism just in the last year and a half. When you see people who are suffering on a daily basis, I think telling them hold out for justice that may not exist and may never come, it's I don't think it's the best choice. I think we're going to need to accept a less than ideal solution. Both sides are going to need to make compromises. Let's let's stop let's stop killing each other. Let's create peace. And maybe it'll take 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years before we can really have any kind of historical transitional justice.
Amazing. So I've just before we move on to your final section, Stephen, there's been a lot of talk in the chat, which I'm very interested to follow up on. But I'm very aware that people, do have a timeline and we're running a little bit behind on that. So we will go into Stephen's section and I will give the concluding speech. Um, and then afterwards, when the recording is finished, we will come back. And if people are interested in talking afterwards, then that'll be perfectly fine. So if that unless anybody has any objections, we'll move on to Stephen's part now. Go ahead, Stephen.
Great. So I'm going to keep it pretty brief so we can have more discussion. I think that would be great. The title is Initial Proposals for Geopolitical Cooperation. I'll try to cover some of what Susie's talked about, kind of some of the proposals, the obstacles, and maybe some things I think we've missed. I just want to start with two quotes. I usually use these quotes. The first is from Dwight Eisenhower, General President, which says, "The world must learn to work together or finally it will not work at all." And the second from Viktor Frankl, the famous Holocaust survivor, author, "Since Auschwitz, we know what man is capable of, and since Hiroshima, we know what is at stake." And I think at the risk of paraphrasing Viktor Frankl, I think just that's what I feel like we're living through the last year and a half is not that life was perfect before, but I think on October 7th and everything since, Israelis and Palestinians and those who care about us, you can see what's at stake here. I mean, you can see the depths of evil to which humanity can fall, and the stakes if we can't make peace, if we can't make it work together. So yeah, peace talks. There have been many efforts, Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations before Oslo, as you brought up in the beginning, Camp David talks, the Arab Peace Initiative, the Quartet Roadmap for Peace, Obama-led talks. Pretty much every U.S. president has tried to bring peace in some way or other. Some were more successful, some weren't. And then at the same time, I want to mention the things that that didn't work. So we have the 1978 Camp David Accords, Peace Israel-Egypt, which caught a lot of people by surprise, the Jordan-Israel peace agreement, and of course the Abraham Accords, which Trump was mentioned earlier, and I did not vote for Trump at any time. I'm not a huge fan personally, but I think we need to give credit. The Trump administration achieved a lot of influential, important normalization agreements, which some on the pro-Palestinian side are critical of, but those are certainly achievements from a diplomatic and pro-peace perspective. So I think just taking that as a whole, just some takeaways, I would say we can learn, you can force, the U.S. has been successful at forcing Israeli and Palestinian leaders to the table. So you can force them to negotiating table, you can't force them to sign a deal, right? So you may be able to put carrots and sticks pressure on them to sit down and negotiate, but if the conditions are not right, if the proposal's not right, and the climate's not right, they're not going to agree to it. It's not going to last. At the same time, peace isn't always linear or even predictable, right? So just because it feels like we've never been further from peace doesn't mean we can't wake up tomorrow and have a peace agreement. It won't be easy. It will take a lot from both sides, but we shouldn't give up on it. It's definitely achievable, and this can surprise everyone. not all peace is the same. So the Egyptian and Jordanian peace agreements, like we're not killing each other, that's great. And as Susie said, sometimes we'll have to take, an imperfect peace. It's better than war. But I do think that the Israeli-Palestinian relationship has a lot more potential to be, um, maybe even more than the Bahraini and Emirati agreements, because we do have so much work, so much working together already. There is so much economic cooperation, and there's a much greater potential here. Um, I was in Dubai and Bahrain in 2012, almost 10 years before the Abraham Accords, and you could tell that people there were right for that piece. And having been to Riyadh 3 years ago, it feels very much the same. So I won't be surprised if that happens. Um, Ultimately, I think the goal should be improving the situation for most Israelis and Palestinians. We're not going to get a perfect agreement. Let's make the situation better for both sides. Um, the powers that be that decide that have to stop being risk averse. So I think leadership has been risk averse. They prefer to not reach an agreement and make an agreement that might backfire. Um, and as a result, we're turning down situations that would be better than the current situation for both sides. And I think we need to go in knowing that there's going to be critics. Not everybody's going to agree to this. And also something we have to all remember, which is that certainly us living here, it feels like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is all-encompassing. You can't escape it. But it's only part of the regional puzzle. So it's a factor. It's not the only part of what's going on in Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in North Africa. There's other problems as well. In terms of the challenges, so as was mentioned earlier, settlements and borders, not impossible. We know that they've been very close before. They've agreed in principle on like 99% of the stuff already. Security versus sovereignty. So there's kind of a challenge, which is that the more sovereignty that Israel gives the Palestinian state, the more security risk there is for Israel. The more security risk there is for Israel, the less it wants to give sovereignty to Palestinians, and then you get into a chicken and egg situation. Jerusalem, which one piece of land, everybody wants it, so that's why during Oslo they just left it to be discussed later and never came up with a solution. And right of return for Palestinians, which no Israeli leader politically can accept, and no Palestinian leader politically can give up on. I don't have all the answers, not here to give all the answers, but just some thoughts on each of these. In terms of settlements and borders, we need a government on both sides. We need government that has a strong enough base of support to overcome the critics. And frankly, neither government is there right now. They're both quite weak in terms of their basic support. In terms of security and sovereignty, I think we need to go in open-eyed, understanding, knowing that there are spoilers on both sides who do not want there to be peace. There are going to be both Jewish, Israeli, and Palestinian extremists who will try to ruin an agreement, and it's going to take the courage to understand that when things happen, that's not a reason to stop steps that are put in place for our long-term betterment. In terms of Jerusalem, I think there's no solutions can be perfect. Doing this with students, I've had interesting ideas. One idea was a two-state, three-capital solution. So the Palestinian state has a capital in Ramallah and East Jerusalem. The Israeli state has a capital in Tel Aviv and West Jerusalem. International, there's all kinds of ideas. I think something we need to remember, Jerusalem throughout history, up until 150 years ago, was much, much, much smaller. So 150 years ago, there were approximately 20,000 people, if I'm not mistaken, living in Jerusalem. The city today is bigger, not just by population, but geographically. So it's not like when we talk about Jerusalem that has a long history for Jews.
Stephen, are you still there?
Sorry about that. Yeah.
That's okay.
So Jerusalem, the city that both sides are so attached to, is not actually the modern city of Jerusalem, and therefore I think we should be emotionally a lot more okay with dividing up parts of it if that's the direction we go in, or just acknowledging that this is not the historical Jerusalem; it's a much bigger city. And in terms of right of return, I think the numbers are exaggerated. It's made as some kind of demographic explosion and possibility. In all reality, the numbers are probably a lot more modest. It can be phased, and frankly, it should be done in tandem with a functioning Palestinian government or state, so that people who do choose to return from who are from here originally have the option of returning to a functioning Palestinian government, have the option of voting for Palestinian government, etc. Um, Finally, I want to look at the regional interests. I think that there are a lot of interests for all of the governments in the region. As Hapta mentioned, there's a huge issue with non-state actors, armed non-state actors, violent non-state actors in the region. And peace in the Israel-Palestinian context will allow us to focus on disarmament of non-state actors, which have been running a state in Lebanon, have been disrupting states in Syria and Iraq, in Yemen. So this is something that the region could focus on better for peace. Economics, obviously, not just stability for economic growth, but loans, investments, and regional trade. There's a lot of unrealized, untapped potential here that can be reached. The Abraham Accords with Israel and UAE just shows you the tip of the iceberg here. And protecting and sharing natural resources, which we could do a lot better if we were cooperating as well. And then to finish up, I think there's a trend here, which is that countries are preferring to work with Israeli and Palestinians separately. So you have, at the same time, you have more and more countries recognizing Palestine as a state, while at the same time you have more countries that didn't recognize Israel recognizing Israel and normalizing relations. So both things are happening, which is basically countries are saying we we don't want to we don't want to get involved in this issue. We're just going to work with both of you separately. And we, Israelis and Palestinians, we kind of run the risk of being left, holding this problem with no one who wants to help us out. Which is why I say it's our problem. We need to own this problem. And yeah, I just conclude by saying October 7th was the worst day in, you know, over 70 years for Jews. It, in retrospect, was the worst day in 70 years for Palestinians. And that's not a coincidence. I think we need to realize that our futures are intertwined. It's not one side wins, one side loses. The best outcome here, the best realistic plausible outcome for Israelis and the best plausible outcome for Palestinians is the same, which is a workable solution for both sides. And maybe something we haven't mentioned, we talked about regional actors, something we haven't mentioned, which is 2 million Palestinians living in Israel. So there already is kind of a solution. This is, I'm not calling for one state solution, but to all the people who don't believe that we can live side by side, we already do. Like there's 2 million Palestinians living in Israel. There's almost 8 million Jews. Life is not perfect. You all have run into so many challenges here, but ultimately, we do a lot better living together in the same country than we do putting up borders and walls as we did in Gaza and trying to pretend that this issue won't explode. So I think that both sides are actually better off with more and more contact. It doesn't seem like it's close. We need bold leadership, we need courage, and we don't have it. We have a bunch of cowards leading on all sides. So I'll just finish with a quote from the Mishnah. It's a Jewish teaching that guides me. It says, which is basically, if I don't act for myself, then who will act for me? And even when I do act for myself, I shouldn't take that much pride in because I'm just doing what I should be doing. And if you don't act now, then when will you act? So I think this is the approach we have to take, which is that peace is not going to be here tomorrow. At least it doesn't seem like it. But the onus is on us. Like we're here, let's be part of the solution. Let's start acting now. We can't wait for peace. We need to start when there's war, working for peace, and each person do their little step. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Stephen. That could have been a conclusion all in itself. I will do have a brief closing speech, and then after that, I will end the recording. And if anybody's interested in staying later, then we can have a chat. All right. As we close today's conference, I want to take a moment not to summarize, but to look forward past these discussions. This wasn't just a gathering of experts, it was the first step. A deliberate attempt to bring geopolitical analysis and peace building into the same conversation. Because when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, one of the greatest mistakes we make is dividing the two. Security, diplomacy, history, and identity. These don't exist in isolation. They collide in real lives every single day. And if we want a different outcome from what we've been seeing for the last 70, 75 years, then we need a different approach. And that's what today has been about. Not about reaching a consensus or solving the conflict, but about setting the tone for what comes next. On a personal note, I'm still a student. I don't lead a government. I don't hold a title. But I organize this because I believe that young people and independent voices can change the way peace is approached. Not by replacing diplomacy, but by pushing it forward, by daring to ask better questions. What I've learned through this process is simple, that peace is not impossible. No conflict has lasted forever. It's just deeply inconvenient from those benefiting from the status quo. And that's why spaces like this matter. They disrupt that status quo, not through protest or through pressure, but through reasoned, structured dialogue. I also want to say a brief word about the organization behind this space, the Coalition for Peace and Coexistence, or CPC. The CPC is an independent initiative I founded very recently to support critical dialogue and amplify diverse voices, connecting peace builders from across the Israeli-Palestinian context and beyond. Importantly, we don't push any political solution or ideology. We don't advocate for any solution, and that's intentional. CPC does not replace existing efforts. The only goal of it is to link them, to provide a neutral, constructive platform where dialogue is possible, regardless of political stance or institutional affiliation. Right now, CPC operates as a growing publication with over 250 articles written by peace builders, scholars, and ordinary people working towards shared understanding. But we're expanding far beyond that. In the months ahead, the CPC will launch an interactive website. We'll host more international events like this one and begin building an education and training arm to empower the next generation of regional leaders and mediators. This is just the beginning, and I hope many of you will help shape what comes next. Looking ahead, our work does not end here. This was just the beginning, just the first step. On the 31st of this month, some of us will reconvene for the second part of this series, titled Solution-Driven Strategies for Peace. That event is different in focus and in tone. It's not about understanding the current dynamics, it's about proposing a way forward. We'll be shifting from analysis to solutions, from describing the problem to testing answers, from examining the obstacles to mapping potential opportunities, and we won't be afraid to disagree. We'll hear further models, proposals, and ideas, some bold, some incremental, but all grounded in the belief that peace building must be both visionary and realistic. So if today's conference asked, what is the situation? The next will ask, what can actually be done about it? And in the future, there will be more conferences. In what form they take, I'm not sure yet. But your attendance shows something very important. It shows that there is interest, and that alone is worth fighting for. I want to be clear. We are not claiming to solve this conflict, but we are claiming something else, something just as important, that people from across backgrounds, disciplines, and generations can come together to talk honestly, constructively, and respectfully. That trust, however small, can be built not by avoiding disagreement, but by engaging with it. And that if enough people do this work quietly, persistently, then we may just change the conversation. We may eventually change the outcome as well. So as you leave here today, I ask just one thing. Don't let this conversation end in this room. Carry it with you into your communities, your writing, your diplomacy, and your advocacy. Challenge what needs to be challenged. Defend what is worth defending. And never fall into that trap of thinking that your voice doesn't matter. Because every one of you here has already proven that it does. So thank you for being part of this final step. I look forward to continuing work with all of you at the Solution-Driven Strategies for Peace on the 31st and well into the future. And for those who wish to continue the conversation, we'll now move into an informal off-record discussion place. a chance to connect more personally, to share thoughts, or just to decompress. But until then, until next time, keep speaking, keep listening, and keep believing that peace, however difficult, is still possible. So thank you all so, so much for being part of this and being part of the dream for peace. That is the end of this session.